S-P-E-A-K. Everybody wanna sing. Speak up, S-P-E-A-K. Speak up.
In this issue of Speak Up, Future Shock Special Reading, The New Economy Back in Force, Angelina Jolie, Ditto, An American in Venice, Radio Boy, Wild Wrestling, Big Men at Play, New American Slang, Esperanto, Hope or Utopia, Peace in the Hebrides, a short story from Muriel Spark, and a song from Macy Gray. Hi, and welcome to issue 195 of Speak Up. We start on page 4.
Future shock.
Who is your friend? New website sensations keep cropping up like watermelons in the summertime. The latest big hit has got to be www.youaremyfriend.com, an unassuming site that was created for fun to put a smile on a friend's face. Since early December, the site has, in fact, averaged an incredible 1 million visitors a week, and it is easy to understand why. All the visitor needs to do is simply type in a pal's name in the appropriate spot to create this instant, personalized, and extremely complimentary message. There are over 6 billion people alive today. Out of those, I consider name my friend. An expanding shoe. Parents of growing children will love this latest invention, expandable shoes. Called inchworms, these sneaker-like shoes, which currently come in 4 styles, expand 2 half sizes, guaranteeing a few extra months of wear. All the wearer has to do is push a button on the outside of the shoe and then pull the ends of the shoe until it clicks into the next half size. Costing $45, inchworms can be purchased at www.inchwormshoe.com. An online world of its own. Its predecessor, Sims, was the most popular computer game of all time, having sold 8 million copies in 17 languages since 2000. Now, Sims Online is here, a new virtual frontier that operates on the same principle, to keep Sims, digital alter egos, happy by feeding them, entertaining them, and keeping them healthy. But with Sims Online, players don't go it alone on their computers. They can now connect to central services over the Internet for a cost of $49.95 plus a $9.95 monthly access fee, where their Sims interact in a 3-dimensional world. For more information, visit www.ea.com. Sound on the slopes. Now snowboarders can glide to their favorite tunes thanks to the recently developed world's first and only wearable electronic jacket. With an integrated iPod control system built into the left sleeve, the waterproof electronic Burton Amp jacket has buttons along the forearm that allow wearers to change songs or up the volume without taking off their gloves. The result of a joint venture between Burton Snowboards and Apple Computers, this jacket, which is available in a limited edition, costs $499 and can be purchased at www.apple.com.
Next up, we take a look at the new economy, which appears to be making a comeback. The dramatic collapse of the new economy destroyed most people's faith in the commercial potential of the internet. Yet there are many entrepreneurs who still believe that there is money to be made. Englishman Steve Jones, for example, is a manager with Alter Ego Communications, which recently bought and relaunched the Infinito portal. Steve Jones talked to Speak Up about the folly of the first internet boom.
I suppose if you look historically at innovation, if you look at new technology, whether it be the steam train converting to diesel or the introduction of aeroplanes as a commercial service, there's always an awful lot of waste. The Darwin principle of the survival of the fittest has also applied to the internet. People set out on adventures not really knowing where it was going to lead. There was a lot of promise with regard to its power of communicating and its power of reach, but then converting that into a commercial business proved to be much more specialist than anybody could have imagined. And I think really now what we're seeing is history simply repeating itself. What's happening in the retailing business over the past 30 years? We've seen shopping malls, stores changing in size from generalist to specialist to mission stores and so on. So we're seeing with the internet, you can't be good at everything. You don't expect Essilunga to suddenly turn around and start selling high fashion, or at least you don't expect that to happen in the near future at least. Same with portals and with the internet. You can't be a generalist when it comes to a commercial proposition. I have to communicate what it is my services are, what my product is that's on offer, and make it as attractive an offer as I possibly can. And I have to communicate that in a background of noise that is much more immediate and is much more vast than any shopping high street. At least shops have the advantage of geographical limitations, whereas the internet, you can shop the whole world.
Was your faith in the internet shaken by the collapse of the new economy?
It was shaken not by the collapse, but by the concern was the huge growth and the amazing financial and business measures, what are known in the trade as KPIs. The measures of success of your business were completely superficial. The number of visits to your site somehow meant that you had a great commercial, valuable site. And of course, visiting a site doesn't make anybody any money. Not really, especially with the advertising on the internet being as it is today. It's a fairly superficial measure, but nonetheless, people were going even to the stock exchange and having many investors believe that lots of visits to your sites meant lots of money, but of course it didn't.
Could you explain KPIs?
Key performance indicators with the internet, with a new business, with a new channel, really. In the old days, you might have measured your car's performance in fuel consumption or miles per hour, kilometers per hour. You might have measured your retail business in sales per square meter or pounds per square foot. With a website, how would you measure a website's performance? So new key performance indicators, KPIs, had to be introduced. So there were things like earnings per user and page views and user time spent on the website. A whole series of new measures were created to try and give a feel for the value or importance of your website. The financial industry also, the stock exchange, had to find new measures. So things like EBITDA became a much more important measure than traditional measures, and causing enormous problems because it didn't take into account the enormous amounts of investment required to launch a website or to make the website more noticeable than the other millions of websites on the internet, which was mainly done, funnily enough, through traditional advertising. Most of the money was spent on getting people to notice your site. And then hopefully once you're on that site, you stay there. But of course, churn, which is the technical term for people visiting a site, consuming the offer and then going somewhere else, was an awful cost to the internet business. It was estimated that at some point it was costing people who ran internet sites about 60 euros a head just to get people to come to your site and partake in one of your services or offers. And of course that couldn't be sustained if your offer was only worth 10 euros. And this was the dilemma of internet.
Speak up.
This month sees Angelina Jolie as Lara Croft again. Speak Up saw it first. Angelina Jolie was considered the ideal actress to impersonate the electric Lara Croft. Speak Up went to Los Angeles to talk to her about the new film. We began by asking where she learned all the athletic skills needed for the movie's incredible stunts. Was it something from her childhood?
Yeah, okay. Good question. I was always kind of athletic and tomboyish, but I think at a certain point we all hit my teens and I think until the first Tomb Raider, I hadn't been very physical. A lot of times in our life, unless we're out of school, we don't tend to run and jump over things and try new skills and do gymnastics. So this film kind of awakened the tomboy in me that is very athletic and likes to play and learn all these skills. So all the stunts in the film were the first one and this one were fun to do, and this one I think the most challenging was the horse, because working with an animal. The helicopter scared him, and the spinning of the rifle scared him. And
Okay, which did you like best in the filming? Horse, jet ski, or motorcycles?
I love motorcycles, but the jet ski was great because I'd never been on a jet ski, and so it was the new skill I had to learn, and I fell over a lot, and I hated it the first few days, and I didn't want to do it, and And so I liked it because when I finally got it, I felt I had succeeded, and I felt very good about that.
Is this the first time you've ever been on a set with your son?
No, Beyond Borders was the first time.
What's it like being a mother on the set? Is it difficult to balance?
It's so much fun to balance, and I feel so fortunate that I'm able to bring my son to work, and I feel so sad for mothers that can't, because that just must be so difficult. It was funny. Beyond Borders was a more emotional film, and it was a different kind of a film, and so being with the child on set felt a certain way. Being Lara Croft and having a baby was funny.
Okay, which is harder, to be Lara Croft or to be a single mom?
It was to be a single mom. Much harder. I think I wasn't thinking about it that way, but it's okay. I mean, I think certain things are just meant to be. And my mom was a single mom, and she's a great mom.
You seem pretty clear now. Did you discover that you needed a lot of strength to raise a child by yourself?
It just felt right. I mean, I feel like it's an easy choice. It's the most wonderful thing in the world being a parent, and it's such a blessing. And there's nothing difficult about it that isn't 100 times more rewarding than anything else in the world. You know, so it's but sometimes just the fear of not being. My fear of not being a good enough mom is. I put so much pressure on myself for that, and I don't have a lot of. I'm pretty confident about doing stunts or being an actor, but being the best mom possible, I worry about that and want to make sure I'm doing that right.
Speak up.
On the subject of craftsmanship, Justin Ratcliffe takes a trip to Venice.
For 1,000 years, gondola building has been the unique preserve of a select band of craftsmen in Venice, but not anymore. Tom Price, 32, an American from North Carolina, recently became the first foreigner to open a gondola boatyard, or squero, in the city. Tom became fascinated by the asymmetric design of gondolas while studying anthropology and boat building in the US. He arrived in Venice in 1996, but his efforts to find an apprenticeship were met with skepticism.
The major problem that I had was the fact that I didn't speak Italian, or Venetian for that matter. So they saw this young college graduate, which in Italy, if you have studied, then you don't know how to work with your hands, and if you know how to work with your hands, then you don't study. So they saw me as not worth wasting their time on. And it took many months for me to find someone who was willing to take me on.
He was finally taken on by Daniele Bonaldo, a semi-retired maestro. Tom completed his first gondola in about 6 months, and 6 more followed, all of which went to cities in America. After working with Bonaldo for several years, Tom decided to set up his own boatyard and named it Squero Canaletto, after a painting of the building by the 18th century artist. His new status as a boatyard owner has created controversy among local boat builders, but Tom is undaunted.
As long as I was working underneath a Venetian as a gondola builder, everybody was quite pleased with what I was doing. However, when I started my own boatyard just recently, it's interesting how the opinion of the other boatyards has changed towards me, and so they feel like that I've had everything given to me, and that I'm too young to have accomplished what I've done, and so therefore I don't merit it. But I think once that we start turning out boats and they see the quality of our work, that again the opinion will change for the positive.
Roberto is the 4th generation of gondola builders in the Tramontin family. He was apprenticed to his father, still working today, aged 82, for no less than 24 years before building his first gondola. The Tramontin boats are known as the Ferraris of the gondola world. Roberto knows Tom Price and respects his courage, but he told me that his attitude is too commercial. Ironically, it is Tom's commercial sense, and the fact that he's an outsider, that may well give gondola building a less elitist and more up-to-date image.
One of the aspects of the boat builders in Venice is that they are excellent craftsmen, but they tend to not be so good at working with the customers. And that's one of the things that we really feel is going to be our key to success, is offering higher quality work but also service to the gondoliers. And this is an aspect probably of my American heritage, my American upbringing, that I really feel is going to make our business a success.
But the main challenge facing Tom's business is the fact that the ancient art of gondola building is in danger of dying out altogether. During the height of the Venetian Republic in the 17th century, there were 65 squari and 10,000 gondolas in Venice. Today, there are 6 squari and about 500 gondolas. Even Roberto Tramontin agrees that time is running out, because the old masters are all past retirement age, and he sees the future of his profession as uncertain. Now that he has his own boatyard, Tom has decided to offer workshops in gondola building to non-Venetians in an effort to perpetuate the skills required. One is a short-term program intended to give people a taste of traditional boat building in Venice. Another apprenticeship program lasts for a full year and is aimed at professional boat builders.
My true passion is actually teaching others traditional boat building, because as with anything traditional, if it's not passed on, it's lost. You can't just write it down and expect that somebody centuries down the road is going to be able to understand exactly how to build a gondola. So I feel that the most important thing that I can do is to teach other people how to build boats in a traditional manner, and especially the gondola.
You obviously see this as a long-term project, and you're going to be around for some years to come, I presume, in Venice, in your boatyard here.
Yeah, well, I have 15 years to pay off the mortgage, so yeah, I'm here for the long haul. For somebody who's interested in traditional boat building, there's no city in the world like Venice. It's like being in heaven.
Speak up.
Next up, we talk to a musician with a message, Radio Boy.
McDonald's by Radio Boy is an unusual tune with an odd title, but by far the strangest thing about it is how it was made. This becomes clear when you see Radio Boy perform it live, methodically destroying a McDonald's Happy Meal and feeding the noise this makes into a sampler to build the tune's intricate layers of sound. It is, he told me, a way of making music that reflects his experience of life.
Well, my music for many years now has involved working with sound, in particular taking sort of sounds of my environment, the everyday, and sort of reconstruct them as in rhythmic form, and particularly for a while in house music and in other different forms like that. It struck me a couple of years ago that the sounds that I was taking were all very good sounds, you know, things of my friends and my environment and my places that I'd visited and rooms where I'd spent time and that sort of thing. It was like a document in a diary, and there was no document of all the bad stuff that also make noises, things like George Bush or things like litter or things like sweatshops or the things that had made my Nike trainers that I wore for a few years. And I kind of made that decision that I would also try and catalogue some of the crap in the world, and this is what this album and this project is about, is trying to sort of document some of the crap that's going on and try and somehow turn it to either a more positive experience, but at the same time kind of critiquing it as well. For example, McDonald's, I'd take the sound of a Big Mac meal and do everything except eat it, sort of stamp on it and destroy it and tear it up and throw it against the wall. The copy of The Sun by Rupert Murdoch, I sort of tear up and do everything except read it. Just get as many noises as I can out of those individual items and then make a track out of it.
This unorthodox style of music making is only one of several outlets for an intense 30-year-old who is known to his parents as Matthew Herbert. The son of a BBC sound engineer, he began performing in orchestras and bands at the age of 7. Since touring Scandinavia with a swing band at 16, he has explored house music, electronic music, film music, techno and jazz, adopting the names Wish Mountain, Dr. Rocket and Herbert to separate his different approaches. His technical wizardry also features on remixes for well-known performers like Björk. But the Radio Boy or Mechanics of Destruction project is particularly close to his heart. The victims of his onstage assaults are carefully selected to express deeply held political convictions. He told me that he chooses objects that represent companies who he believes have behaved badly, like Gap, Nike, Starbucks, and Coca-Cola. His anger is also directed at genetically modified food, television, Hollywood films, and manufactured pop bands. He knows these targets may not actually feel the force of his disapproval, but as someone who has turned down millions rather than have his music in adverts for products he dislikes, he's going to carry on regardless.
I'm trying to change the world, but I'm obviously not going to succeed and not succeeding. But I think it's important to add my voice, my musical voice, to a kind of a real growing sort of sea of discontent that I really feel is sweeping the world, that there's a complete unhappiness in it about the structure of modern society, with a total shift away from kind of elected state power that operates for the good of the many to corporate ways and the business is always right ethos, which just serves the few.
Speak up.
If gondola building is a craft, then so too is professional wrestling. Or is it?
Professional wrestling may be considered a quintessentially American pastime, but it also has quite a television following around the world. Speak Up met one of WWE's star performers, Canadian Test Keibler, a giant of a man who stands 6'7" and weighs 280 pounds. We were talking about how well he thought professional wrestling was catching on worldwide.
Everywhere else we go, Germany, England, we always sell out. Crowds are already huge. I mean, wrestling's huge worldwide. We went to India and sold out there. Japan, we sold out. We go to Australia, we had nearly 70,000 people there. It's huge worldwide, people just love it wherever.
Part of the appeal of wrestling is the theatricality of it all, with each wrestler having a clearly defined stage persona. We asked Test to describe his character.
I'm in between, now, kind of good guy, kind of bad guy. I myself prefer being the bad guy. I always said it's a lot easier to get people to hate me than to like me. I'm just more comfortable being the villain for some reason, maybe because I was always the bully in school growing up or whatever. It just comes naturally, but the bad guy is definitely something I enjoy playing a lot more than the good guy.
And yet if the world has the idea that wrestling contests are at best choreographed, at worst rigged, then Test was at pains to point out that wrestlers do more than enough to earn their money.
Well, the physical abuse, you just don't take falls like that 4 or 5 times a week, and plus the traveling on top of that, and your body cannot not get hurt. It's not just myself, it's everybody else that I work with as well. I'm still very young in this business. Guys like, Hulk Hogan, Undertaker have really put their body through a lot over the years, and, I myself have a cracked vertebrae, 2 bulging discs, my knees are real bad. I'm only 28 years old, and there's guys like Kurt Angle who just broke his neck again, and Edge who just had neck surgery again. Then there's poor Darren Drozdoff, who's a quadriplegic from landing on his head the wrong way. The falls we take are very real, and the risks that we put our bodies through every night are very real.
Did this make stepping into the ring a scary experience?
No, I'm a trained professional doing this, and we can't say it enough that if you're not, don't try this at home. I can remember being a kid in the schoolyard doing this stupid, trying to imitate some of the wrestlers' move, which was probably the stupidest thing you could do. These moves are very real, very serious. You need to be a trained professional to do it. I don't step in the ring scared about breaking my neck every time I go in there, because I know I'm going to take care of the guy across from me, and hopefully he's going to take care of me. And, we trust each other, and, everybody we work with trusts each other. That's how it goes.
After all, Mike Tyson once admitted that he was aware of the fact that he could die every time he stepped into a boxing ring.
Well, it's a little different when you got some guy trying to really beat your head in and try to kill you and knock you out for real. You take a look at those boxers like Muhammad Ali or even Evander Holyfield now. You can tell just the way they talk, like how many punches to the head do. To me, boxing, I love watching it. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of boxing, but it's not something I would ever get involved in. I like to keep my speech the way it is.
We also talked about Test's fans, who are known as the Testicles.
Testicles are basically my fans. Rock has his people, Hulk Hogan has his Hulkamaniac, and Test has his testicles. It was a marketing idea that really got going really well, and it's good for a few laughs too.
Test was in fact accompanied by his girlfriend and fellow performer Stacey, who dances during the show. We asked this native of Baltimore, who once had a walk-on part in the John Waters movie Pecker, whether she had ever felt any jealousy towards the testicles.
No, I love testicles too. There are testicles, so I love them just as much.
Speak up.
A survey of the latest American slang. Chuck Rolando tells us how to be hip.
Keeping track of all the latest developments in slang is never easy, but there are kind people in this world who make their living from writing books on the subject. The latest offering is an amusing volume called The Hipster Handbook by Robert Lanham, which was published by Anchor Books in February. The hipster lifestyle may have begun with the Beat generation, but is still alive and well in the United States, particularly New York. Hipsters, the book explains, graduated from a liberal arts school whose football team hasn't won a game since the Reagan administration. They frequently use the term postmodern or POMO, and they tend to have one Republican friend whom they always describe as my one Republican friend. In order to help you, here is a glossary of terms which we shamelessly stole from the hipster website at www.hipsterhandbook.com. Here goes. Bronson, beer. Example, I drank a sixer of Bronson's last night while watching the game. Bust a Moby, to dance. Example, let's go to the tunnel and bust a Moby. Did you see her moves at the party last night? She really knows how to bust a Moby. Chipper, a woman who's easy. Example, she's a real chipper and will sleep with anyone after one Bronson. Clothesline, the gossip that is on the scene. Example, yo, I heard on the clothesline that she is sleeping with Billy. She is such a chipper. Cronkite, boy. Example, have you seen Anne's new Cronkite? She met him at the cafe and he is such a Fredo. Deck, a key word for most hipsters, similar in meaning to the antiquated fresh. To be deck is to be up on the latest trends, cutting edge, and or hip. Example, that tassel we met at the gallery opening sure looked deck in her cowboy boots. Have you checked out the new Jonathan Latham book? It's deck. Fin, the opposite of deck, similar to outdated terms like whack and lame. Something that is fin is bad or undesirable. Example, how can you like that Van Diesel movie? Every film he's ever starred in has been fin. My date with Larry was so fin. He took me to Applebee's and ordered cheese fries as an appetizer. Fredo, an ugly guy who thinks he's good looking. Example, Bill thinks all the girls love him, but they all know he's a Fredo. Jerry, a stoner or hippie. Example, my pits smell Ishtar. I feel like a total Jerry. Juicer, a ladies' man, an individual who has undeniable sex appeal. Example, I wish he would ask me out. He's such a juicer. Jug, a 40-ounce bottle of domestic beer. Example, tassels respect me. I can drink a whole jug and still bust a mean Moby. Kale, money. Example, yo, Kim, can you slide me some kale? I'm still waiting for my mom to send rent. Peace, cell phone. Example, John is such a nerd. He doesn't even have a piece. I must have been on the subway. My piece didn't ring. Tassel, girl. Example, Jim is definitely a Fredo, but somehow he gets a new tassel every night.
Speak up.
Piers Grimley Evans meets the chairman of the British Esperanto Society.
100 years ago, a Polish eye doctor saw a bright future for international relations. Everyone, he decided, should learn the same second language and the different nations of the world would get on a lot better. The first part of his vision might seem nearer to reality today, but the language he had in mind was not English. It was Esperanto, a mix of Latin languages, German and Russian. and Esperantists like Edmund Evans, the chairman of the British Esperanto Society, are not at all pleased by English's success, as I discovered when I suggested to him that English as an international language has not done badly.
I think English is doing rather badly, actually. There's a very unfair flow of communication in the world today. A lot of even German newspapers, for example, carry news that's filtered via English. You can sometimes see mistranslations. They've taken English press wires and translated it into German, so that Germans are informed about the rest of the world outside Germany via English-speaking news services, for example. A lot of political debate internationally goes on in English, which discriminates against certain groups. And also from a point of view of efficiency, I was told by a German physicist that the Germans who study physics and go on to become professional physicists don't tend to be the ones who are best at physics, they tend to be the ones who are best at English. A lot of the ones who are better physicists decide that they're not good enough at foreign languages and go away and become bankers instead. So some of the potential great scientists are being lost for inefficient international communication in that case.
Inspired by the goal of democratic and efficient international communication, the Esperanto movement has kept Dr. Ludwig Zamenhof's language alive. It has enjoyed varying fortunes. In its first decades of life, it spread rapidly, but since then its growth has slowed dramatically, and it has on occasion even met fierce resistance. Today, Edmund Evans estimates that there are 10 million people who have learned a bit at some point in their lives. There are 100,000 who can hold a conversation, and there are around 1,000 native speakers. Established speakers socialise and new speakers are recruited at a busy schedule of events.
Encouraging individuals to learn Esperanto is the main thing. Organising interesting events, interesting international events. The biggest international meeting is the World Congress, which takes place every year. It's in Brazil this year. There's a whole load of meetings during the year. In fact, any given day of the year, there's probably an Esperanto meeting going on somewhere in the world. So that's one thing, encouraging individuals to learn Esperanto. There is also some efforts are made to approach governments. For example, in the European Union, one thing that people are asking politicians about is that Esperanto should be taught experimentally in some schools.
The results of this activity can be measured in two ways. One is by the spread of Esperanto. This is uneven. There are, for example, plenty of speakers in Hungary and almost none in all of Indonesia, but the language can now at least be heard on every continent. The other gauge is the language itself, how its aesthetic possibilities have been explored and developed. Over the last 20 years, enthusiasts have contributed to a growing library of novels and, unexpectedly for a language whose raison d'être is purely practical, verse.
There's a huge amount of poetry in Esperanto, actually. This surprises some people, but a lot of people sort of fall in love with the language when they first learn it, and one of the first things they do is write poetry. A lot of that poetry is disastrously bad, of course. Some people, after having used the language for years, actually managed to write good poetry, and yeah, there is some good poetry.
All this, of course, has yet to present international English with much of a challenge, as Edmund Evans is quick to acknowledge.
Well, I think the first thing is to say that Esperantists are living in the real world, and they do understand what the current situation is, and very few people are expecting the situation to change radically within the next few decades. In a way, Esperanto is part of a movement that's been going on since the 17th century, which is when the first international languages were proposed. When Esperanto started, English wasn't the dominant national language, it was rather French. So, looking at it from a long term, who knows what the world's going to be like in 200 years' time. Maybe the dominant national language then will be Chinese or Hindi or something. Esperanto will probably still be around in a few hundred years' time, so it's hard to say. I hope that one day a neutral international language will be used. Who knows, it might not even be Esperanto. There have been other languages proposed.
And he detects encouraging signs for Esperantists' lonely linguistic rebellion. It may not have realised it yet, but the world is slowly beginning to move their way.
I've often heard dissatisfaction with the dominance of English expressed by people who know nothing about Esperanto, or people who think Esperanto cannot be a solution. So perhaps there is a growing awareness of that problem. You can expect that in a way, because the proportion of the world's population that speaks English is decreasing, whereas the proportion of the world's money that is in the hands of English speakers is increasing.
Speak up.
To the peace and quiet of the Hebrides, Justin Ratcliffe visits the land that time forgot.
In 563 AD, St. Columba sailed from Ireland to the Hebrides with the Christian message, converting much of Scotland to his faith. 14 centuries later, his name was remembered when in 1964 the MV Columba was launched in Aberdeen to transport passengers, cars and goods between the Hebridean Islands, providing a lifeline for the local communities and an adventurous journey for the intrepid tourist. In October 1988, Columba left her Scottish home for Great Yarmouth and a £1.5 million refit, a new role as the smallest luxury cruise liner in the world, and a new name as the Hebridean Princess. Carrying a maximum of 49 passengers, many of them accommodated in deluxe staterooms, she sails the Western Isles of Scotland and the coast of Ireland. As soon as we stepped aboard the Hebridean Princess in her home port of Oban, at the start of a 4-day cruise of the Western Isles, we were transported back in time to when graceful service and luxury accommodation were the rule rather than the exception. Indeed, at just 72 metres overall, the Hebridean Princess feels more like a luxury yacht than a cruise ship, and that's exactly how the owners want it to feel. Charles Carroll is chief purser aboard the Hebridean Princess.
It's a very hands-on, one-to-one experience, unlike large cruise ships where it's more logistics rather than developing and building relationships between people. The fact that we run this more like a private yacht rather than a cruise ship, and we intend over the passage of a few days, generally 1 week, to run this rather like a floating house party.
Our first port of call was the Isle of Jura, a rugged island with its mountains rising to the 785-metre peak of An Oya, Mountain of Gold. The population of about 250 is heavily outnumbered by 5,000 red deer. In fact, the name of the island is derived from an Old Norse word meaning Deer Island. The village capital of Craighouse has a few shops, a hotel, a public phone, and a whisky distillery. Founded in 1810, the Jura distillery is open for visits, and the temperate climate and pure crystal waters help create a single malt that is truly unique, light and subtle, yet full of character. Back on board, we sat down to lunch as the Hebridean Princess started up her engines and set a course through the narrow sound of Islay for Colonsay. The island consists of 2 parts. Colonsay derives its name from St. Columba, who introduced Christianity to the region from Ireland in the 6th century, whereas the smaller Oronsay is named after St. Oran. A group of us took advantage of the ship's fleet of mountain bikes to cycle the few kilometres to Killoran Bay, a truly stunning beach and one of the most photographed places in the Western Highlands. A Viking warrior, who had been given a ship burial with his weapons, horse and coins, was uncovered in the sand dunes here in 1882. The next morning we anchored off the Isle of Iona, and I joined the ship's guide, Ted Heath, in the first boat ashore. Ted is a true Highlander from the nearby Isle of Mull, who has a vast knowledge of local history and folklore. He explained how St. Columba founded a small Christian community on Iona, and by the time of his death in 587, he had succeeded in converting the Picts to Christianity when St. Augustine had only just started conversion of the English. The Benedictine Abbey was founded in the 13th century and is the best preserved and most dramatic medieval monument in this part of Scotland. In the early afternoon, the Hebridean Princess arrived at the island of Ulva. This tiny isle has a tragic history. In the 1850s, the ruthless owner deported over 2/3 of the population, turning out men and women by setting fire to their cottages. Ulva was also the birthplace of the African missionary and explorer David Livingstone. Our last full day on board began with a visit to the spectacular southern coast of the Isle of Skye. So far during the cruise, we had been blessed with fine weather, but as we anchored in the black-tinted waters of Loch Scavaig, threatening clouds descended over the mysterious Cuillin Hills. After being dropped off by one of the ship's tenders, I climbed the nearest peak for a better view. With the Hebridean Princess anchored in the far distance, it was a good spot to appreciate the limited impact of man on the Scottish landscape. The weather, of course, can be unsettled in Scotland, even in midsummer, but it is seldom an issue for the passengers who almost expect the weather to be bad, as Ted Heath points out.
Somebody said once that there's no such thing as bad weather, there's only badly dressed people. I have found on this ship that regardless of the weather, if we're able to get ashore, the majority of people will walk or visit quite happily, and they take the weather as being part of the holiday. But I mean, funnily enough, there are places that we visit that are far more atmospheric, like Loch Scavaig, for example, is far more atmospheric with a bit of cloud than it is in sunshine, where everything is stark and standing out quite clearly. And many of the guests would agree with me that it's nicer to see it with a bit of cloud, as it is most of the time.
After rejoining the ship, we headed for the Isle of Muck. This pretty green island belies the Anglo-Saxon inferences of its name, derived from the Gaelic for porpoise, muck mara, which abound in these waters. There are no cars on the island, a farm tractor being the only power transport. But then there are only 2 kilometres of road. In 1588, when a Spanish galleon was wrecked nearby, the surviving Spanish sailors were employed as mercenaries and sent to raid neighbouring islands. There was a wistful mood in the air during our last evening on board, and my mind went back to when St. Columba arrived in this part of the world almost 15 centuries ago.
The Highlanders have this view that the hills are eternal. So even although they may not in some cases be very churchy, they have a religious sort of attitude towards and great respect towards the sea and the hills. And I think that comes across in the calmness that the Islanders in particular have. They seem to have a very simple philosophy that they are living in an eternal kind of environment. My father, for example, settled in this area, and he said he'd been all over the world in the Navy, and he said there is no more beautiful area than the hills and the sea and the lochs up in this part of the world. And I find as I get older that I find these islands and the hills just amazing, you know, and very happy to live in such a really beautiful part of the world.
To conclude this month's issue, Rachel Roberts reads Muriel Sparks' story, Going Up and Coming Down.
How many couples have met in an elevator, lift, ascenseur, ascensore, or whatever you call it throughout the world? How many marriages have resulted? In their elevator, there is usually an attendant, sometimes not. She goes up and down every weekday. At the 105 crush and the 2:35 return, she generally finds him in the crowded box, looking up at the floor number display, looking down at the floor. Sometimes they are alone. He, she discovers, comes down from the 21st. His office? On the board downstairs, 6 offices are listed on the 21st floor. A law firm, a real estate office, an ophthalmologist, a Swiss Chemicals Association, a Palestine Potassium, believe it or not, agency, a rheumatologist. Which of these offices could he belong to? She doesn't look at him direct, but always, at a glance, tests the ramifying possibilities inherent in all 6 concerns. He is polite. He stands well back when the crowd presses. They are like coins in a purse. One day, she catches his eye and looks away. He notices her briefcase while she has her eyes on the floor numbers, going down. Out she pours with the chattering human throng, turns left, the lobby has 2 entrances, and is gone. On the board down there are listed 4 offices on floor 16, her floor. 2 law firms, a literary agency, and an office named W.H. Gilbert, without further designation. Does she work for Mr. Gilbert, he wonders? Is Gilbert a private detective? W.H. Gilbert may well be something furtive. Day by day she keeps her eyes on his briefcase of pale brown leather and wonders what he does. The lift stops at floor 9 and in sidles the grey-haired stoutish man with the extremely cheerful smile. On we go, down, down. She wonders about the young man's daily life. Where does he live? Where and what does he eat? Has he ever read the Bible? She knows nothing, absolutely nothing, except one thing, which is this. He tries to catch a glimpse of her when she is looking elsewhere or leaving the elevator. On the ground floor, seconds, and he's gone. It is like looking out of the window of a train. He flashes by so quickly. She thinks he might be poorly paid up there on the 21st, possibly in the real estate office, or with the expert on rheumatism. He must be barely 25. He might be working towards a better job, but at the moment with very little left in his pocket after paying out for his rent, food, clothes and insect spray. Her long fair hair falls over her shoulders, outside her dark green coat. Perhaps she spends her days sending out membership renewal forms for Mr. Gilbert's arcane activity. Yes, I want to confirm my steadfast support for the cosmic paranormal apostolic movement by renewing my subscription, followed by different rates to be filled in for the categories individual member, couple, and senior citizen, unwaged student. Suppose there is a power failure. She looks at his briefcase, his tie. Everything begins in a dream. In a daydream, she has even envisaged an inevitable meeting in a room in some place where only two could be, far from intrusions, such as in a barn, taking shelter from a storm, snowed up. Surely there is some film to that effect. He does not have the married look. That look, impossible to define apart from a wedding ring, absent in his case, is far from his look. All the same, he could be married, peeling potatoes for two at the weekend. What sign of the zodiac is his? Has there been an orchard somewhere in his past life, as there has in hers? What TV channels does he watch? Her hair hangs over her shoulders. He wonders if she dyes it blonde. Her pubic hairs are possibly dark. Is she one of those girls who doesn't eat, so that you pay an enormous restaurant bill for food she has only picked at? One night the attendant is missing. They are alone. Homicidal? Could it possibly be? He would only have to take off his tie if his hands alone weren't enough, but his hands could strangle her. When they get out at the ground floor, he says, "Good night," and is lost in the crowd. Here in the enclosed space is almost like bundling. He considers how, in remote parts, when it was impossible for a courting man to get home at night, the elders would bundle a couple. They would bundle them together in their clothes. The pair breathed over each other, but were mutually inaccessible, in an impotent rehearsal of the intimacy to come. Perhaps, he flounders in his mind, she goes to church and is better than me. This idea of her being morally better hangs about him all night, and he brings it to the elevator next morning. She is not there. Surely she has flew, alone in her one-room apartment. Her one room, with a big bed and a window overlooking the river? Or is Mr. Gilbert there with her? When she appears next day in the elevator, he is tempted to follow her home that night, but then she might know, feel, guess his presence behind her. Certainly she would. She might well think him a weirdie, a criminal. She might turn and catch sight of him crossing the park, like one that on a lonesome road doth walk in fear and dread, and having once turned round walks on, and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. Does she go to a gym class? She must have caught me looking just now. He knows she does not wear a wedding ring or an engagement ring, but that does not mean very much. She looks at his briefcase, his tie, the floor number. Could he be a diamond merchant with a fold of tissue paper containing 5 one-carat diamonds nestling in his inner pocket? One of the names on the board could be a cover. Other familiar people join them on every floor. A woman with a white smile that no dentist could warm edges towards him while he edges away. One day at the lunch hour, he looks at her and smiles. She is there too in the evening with only 4 other people plus the attendant for the elevator. He takes the plunge. Would she be free for dinner one night? Thursday? Friday? They have made a date. They eat in a Polish restaurant where the clients are served by waitresses with long hair, even blonder and probably more natural than Doreen's. How long does it take for floating myths and suppositions to form themselves into the separate still digits of reality? Sometimes it is as quick or as slow, according to luck, as fixing the television screen when it has gone haywire. Those stripes and cloudscapes are suddenly furniture and people. He is employed by one of the law firms up there on the 21st. His speciality is marine insurance claims. Doreen, as she is called, remarks that it must be a great responsibility. He realises she is intelligent, even before Doreen Bridges, her full name, tells him she works for W.H. Gilbert, Bill, an independent literary agent, and that she has recently discovered an absolutely brilliant new author called Dak Yan, whose forthcoming first novel she has great hopes for. Michael Pivot lives in a bachelor apartment. She shares rooms with another girl in another part of the city. And the curious thing is that all the notions and possibilities that have gone through their minds for the past 5 weeks or more are totally forgotten by both of them. In the fullness of the plain, real facts, their speculations disappear into immaterial nothingness, never once to be remembered in the course of their future life together.
It's time to leave you. Be with Macy Gray when I see you.
That's all for now, folks. See you again next month.